Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. When it comes to EVE news, we got a first news article on some development that's going to happen for EVE Online that's going into testing, and it's actually graphical updates, so no real content updates, but some pretty serious graphical updates from the looks of the screenshots that I saw there. And it's mostly described as setting, again, the foundation for bringing EVE Online into its third decade. I think it's pretty interesting. This is actually one of the strongest parts of EVE Online and CCP from my point of view, is that graphically they can really do some very impressive stuff, and yeah, it's audio graphical updates that are on the menu next. They are also planning, let's hope that it actually happens, but they're planning a mass test next week as well. I'll try to be there, of course, and I'll try to bring you guys the results from all of that. But a lot of stuff should be out on Singularity if you want to take a look at that yourself. But of course, you know, news like that probably won't impact the market all that much, so we'll see what the EVE Online market looks like this week. First, we take a quick look at the New Eden store. As always, we'll see what's happening here. Get a bundle, still with the Elite XIX skin for Omega time. 12 months Omega, alright, that's minus 8%. Is that a bundle as well? Let's take a quick look at the services here. It's not marked as a sale. I think that's basically a bundle price as well. Or is it? Let me know in the comments if that's always there, this minus 10% and minus 8%. But potentially you can have 12 months of Omega for 11 months of plex, basically. And for the skins, let's see here. Don't see those XIX skins marked as new anymore, but we're not noticing any sales or anything like that either. Alright, well, that means we get to take a look at the market. Let's get rid of this window, and here we go. As always, we start with plex and stuff, or the pilot services, and that's coming in at 220. There we go. Let's get started with plex. You may already have noticed it from the ticker, but we have an inflection point. We went pretty close to 4 million, not exactly there, 3.8 million for the average price. The maximum price still a little bit below that, but probably close to 3.9 million. And you can see in the last week, we're definitely having a little bit of a pullback in the price, heading back towards 3.5 million for the average prices. I was not sure which direction we would be going last week, but I think I did mention that we might be pulling back as we get closer and closer to summer. It is June, and here in Belgium it's extremely nice weather, so I do think that outside activities will be starting to ramp up quite a little bit. And I'll give you guys a metric that I got here locally from the news, and that might give a little bit of an insight on what could happen as well for plex and for the activity in EVE Online. It is that 80% of Belgians this summer, so in July or August, are planning to go on holiday to a foreign country. 80%. I think that's crazy high, and I think, you know, this is normal after the real life situation that we all found ourselves in for the last couple of years, that there's like a little bit of a catch-up that's happening there, and as a result, I do think that we'll see a pretty sharp drop-off in activity in EVE Online over the summer. That's my personal expectation on the anecdotal information that I'm getting here locally. A lot of people are not looking at spending even more time behind the screen, even more time playing games. They're looking for something else, and that's actually holidays outside of their home countries. So next up, let's take a quick look at the multiple pilot trade certificates then. Same inflection point, feels like it's a little bit later, right? But you can see that we went up to, let's see, a 1 year high point of 1.64 billion ISK, and now we have a little bit of a pullback towards the 1.5 billion as well. We're a little bit above that, almost 1.6 billion for the sellers, and I think my stomach is growling. I hope it doesn't come through too much. And almost 1.5 billion for the buyers. Not a lot of buyers. As we know, this is actually a little bit of a small market. compared to the plex market, but it does tend to follow it pretty closely, and it has its own opportunities when CCP comes in to buy on the cheap. So overall here we are back in correlation between plex and the training certificates. Skill extractors, I think, had their own sale. Yep, exactly. A little bit before that, so 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, something like that. We can see that the decline in price started here, probably a little bit too sharp to go below 400 million on a couple of days. Volumes are up as well, so people are grabbing those relatively cheap extractors, but we're meeting somewhere in the middle, high point probably a little bit above 430, and here we're back at the 420 mark, something like that, where we can clearly see in the last 5-6 days the average prices have gone very flat, and here the minimum price at the moment is down towards 400 million. So I think we're back into that sell pressure already. The sale has been absorbed and will be moving back in tandem with plex and the skill extractors at 412 million for the first seller, 416 for most, and 403 for the buyers. That's exactly, we saw data points at 420. You can see 416 come into play, and even some aggressive sellers coming in at the 412 mark. So yeah, it's that sell pressure, and that's basically not from the sale anymore, but from the decreased price of plex. The impact on the injectors, here are the large scale injectors doing a counter move, very interesting, and I'm not exactly sure where this is coming from, but on lower volumes we actually have a pretty serious breakout in price in just about 2 weeks, from 700 million to 750 million, to a very pronounced 1-year high point, and we even have apparently gotten transactions coming in today at the 770 million mark, which is where the sellers are at, and they're actually already shooting up as well. 780 million for the sellers, 720 for the buyers. I'm really not sure what's happening here. Perhaps it is that announcement from CCP that they are looking into skill point farms still remaining a thing in the game. I personally think it's no loss for the game, and that it shouldn't be necessarily a profitable thing to just park someone, given the best implants, and then have them plex their way that way. It puts upward pressure on plex, and it creates a lot of SP, that in my opinion stalls or shortens the actual length of the game. But I think CCP mentioned that they are looking into making that still a viable thing. There was also a sale, like a 2-for-1 sale, I think, for extractors, something like that. Might have just boosted the expectations for the large scale injectors, but I still think that there are some dark clouds on the horizon. So this might look like, man, this is an awesome investment, especially if you manage to buy below 700 million, which I think I'm holding 2 of them that I did buy below 700 million throughout this part even, and this part even. I actually hold them for a very long time at this point. This may look like, all right, we're starting to rise, let's see how high it goes, but I still think that if CCP comes out with we're getting the attributes, that this will actually be a very big negative for the skill injectors. Let's see if small scale injectors do something different. No, they are also rising substantially and reached a 1-year high point like around yesterday, although this data point here is still above 160, but let's say for the 5-day moving average, we're definitely on a 1-year high point here at 160 million for the sellers, 141 million for the buyers. It's not exactly on volume, so I do think that it's basically a news related increase in price for the injectors, and this while plex is going down, extractors have lost a little bit of ground, and I think we'll start to see the pressure at the moment there as well. So this is just more margin for those that are creating skill injectors at the moment, or in my opinion, potentially a good time to sell for those that have invested a decently long time ago. Next up, we've got the daily alpha injectors, and a typical pattern, of course. I think we went above 50 million. CCP said we're going to keep an eye on it. It was a little bit of a pullback with FanFest. Might just have been actually the lack of concrete short-term news for what's coming for EVE Online, that I might have said, got a little bit of motivation to keep grinding, whether it is for alts or whether it is for actual alpha players. But then the pressure of the market came back. We touched 50 million again right here on that max price. CSP came in with another sale. So you do see here that they are willing to intervene, especially in that alpha injector market. Pushes back down below 40 million. We're coming back up a little bit, but still 44 million for the sellers and 39 million for the buyers. That is definitely again that very doable daily goal for an alpha clone, in my opinion. Earn 45 million, you're good to go. It's quite different when you actually have to go for the sellers that are selling above 50 million. It is definitely a different feeling, I think, when you get to earn that much on a daily basis. I think here it's a lot easier to get some reserves in and things like that, and I think CCP is keeping a close eye on that. And this is the second time now that we see a 50 million coming into play. Let's do a sale. Let's bring that daily alpha injector supply up, bring the price down a little bit, and keep things affordable and steady for those alpha players. It is something that CCP mentioned that they were willing to do. Very big change, the full sandbox experience for EVE Online. You could say when it first launched, certainly when I started playing as well about a decade ago, but it's just a part of the reality. CCP is now also incarnating like a central bank a little bit that will intervene into at least some of these pilot service markets for sure. Then we get the hypercore that is also showing the trend break here, where we were going up. 1 year high point formed about a week ago at around 390,000 ISK, and expectations do seem to be for things to cool down a little bit. 376,000 for the sellers, 344 for the buyers. My read on that is, yep, summertime is coming, and that is not usually a high point for trade higher highs and things like that. So I think we're seeing a little bit of a pullback there. I don't think it'll be absolutely massive, so I don't think that you'll have to expect a crash down for Plex, for instance, below 3 million and another very pronounced buy opportunity, but it's absolutely possible that your sell opportunity has just passed or is still going right now, because the summertime will be very difficult, I think, to unload especially a lot of your investments. Next we have the mineral market coming in at 11.50. There we go, and let's get started as always with titanium, which is basically flat with a little bit of downwards pressure at the tail end. Definitely not willing to go back towards 4 ISK or anything like that. 374 for the sellers, 359 for the buyers. Pretty narrow margin. Supply wise, we're not seeing too many 200 million units in a single seller until we get closer to that 4 ISK. Right here we get 500 million units on a couple of those, but that's 389, 390. Once we go down towards that 370-ish price for the sellers, you can see that supplies do diminish. So we are in this range where the price also has an impact on supply. People that are not willing to just sell all their titanium at the current prices, and so we'll be hovering a little bit, but a breakout above 4 ISK should not be expected anytime soon, especially on lower activity potentially over the summer as well. Then we've got pyrite, same story, did manage to claw back a little bit, but clearly is starting to move sideways over the last week or so. 910 for the sellers, 869 for the buyers, so that 9 ISK is clearly a little bit of a metric for pyrite at the moment. And we do have one big order that is going to help with probably stability, might also cause prices to start to decline, but here's 1 billion units and then another 800 million units of pyrite coming in at 911, 912. So again, don't expect this to make its way to 950 or anything like that anytime soon, but if it works in the same way as titanium, I think that market dynamic is there in lower activity. Once you go below 9 ISK for the sellers, then those suppliers just start to stop coming in, and so we'll probably be able to bounce up against that 910 quite reliably. Then we've got the Mexalon chart, exactly the same thing. Went to 1 year low point here at 50. Probably the Siege Green update gave us a little bit of a rally, but I think in general expectations will be for a bit of a slowdown in the general economy. So we are slowly moving back down here in price as well. 61 for the sellers and 58 for the buyers. Next up, we've got Isogen, right? My favorite for every single EVE talk. Just take a look at the evolution here. And let's see here. So let's see if I can get that to show a little bit better. So we clearly are in this hesitation phase, in my opinion, but you can see at the tail end here, 5-day moving average, 20-day moving average, going back up above the 350 or crossing that Rubicon. And then we do have some max prices that are starting to take over. So I'm seeing upwards pressure at the moment in Isogen, and it is here 372 now for the sellers, 349 for the buyers. And then we get a 50 million coming in at 380, another 20 million at 397, but you don't have the 200, 400 billion units that are basically keeping things from going back up. You do have some active supplies, sometimes even 70, maybe that's a 20 million at 372 that's being eaten up at the moment by demand, but most suppliers 3 million, 1 million or below that are just not enough. I think at these prices to completely stem the tide, but from time to time it is enough to bring in a little bit of hesitation and a pullback. But yeah, sellers coming in now at 370, clearly well above the 350 mark. It's a very big difference, and all of a sudden 400 disc is coming into view on the front page as well. It doesn't take that much buying to bring Isogen at 400 disc at this point. So I think higher prices are still in the to be expected for Isogen, especially in the longer term. You have to at some point expect these 50 million orders, and then down here we'll have a couple big ones, right? 200 million orders, those to be just gone. When they are gone, I think that's where we'll have, in all likeliness, a consensus price. There could still be like a shock of someone that held back until that consensus is reached, but they're dwindling. That's pretty obvious. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe the 10 million here, those here, but I'd say we're seeing maybe 300 to 400 million units still from those old reserves that are keeping things in check at the current price. At some point we're going to be higher, not sure what that price is going to be. Those sell orders won't be there, and that is where you can really start to expect us to top and to start to move within that range, in my opinion. But for now, this is probably still too low for Isogen. Very, very cool in my book to see this dynamic and to see this stuff play out. But this is clearly upwards pressure, and 350 is giving out at the moment. Then we've got the Noxium chart, which is, I think, where eventually Isogen is going to head as well. So let's say that maybe 1100, 1250 or something like that could be at a price where those massive sell orders, those old reserves really start to dry up, when everyone has sold everything that they're willing to sell at that profit, and it becomes that active supply demand. Then you've got high points, low points, and clearly a market that is dictated by what's being bought, what's needed in the economy, and what's actually being created in low sec. And for Noxium, it's got a pretty wide range from 1000 to 1400 ISK. At the moment, we are at the slightly lower end, but you can see at the tail end again, just like with Isogen, that we are seeing a little bit of upwards pressure there as well. 1140 for the sellers, 1113 for the buyers. Super narrow margin on this one. You can see here that this is active supply and demand that is creating the price. There's no margin because everything has to be brought in from low sec, mostly from low sec, and as a result we do have a completely different dynamic. The one thing that could cause problems, or that could basically delay this entire story, is of course the summer slowdown, right? If there is actually lower activity, despite the fact that CCP did come out with Siege Green that makes industry more accessible, more doable, lower demand could put pressure on these prices and could basically keep Isogen in limbo for longer, could stretch out these reserves over a longer period of time as well. It's not like next month all of a sudden there's no orders above 10 million. This is the top. Well, if by next month July, August, we do see a substantial pullback in activity in EVE Online, expect demand to drop off as well, and expect those reserves to last much, much longer. So might be an after the summer story before we see like really highs for Noxium again, or really the consensus price for Isogen. That's a little bit my take on all of this. Summer could be tough for those that are looking for high prices. Then we've got Zydrine next from Nullsec that is still going and testing higher price points. When above 1250, gives back a little bit of ground from that, but we're talking 1206 for the sellers, 1167 for the buyers, so 1200 basically for Zydrine. Highest price for the entire year. Does look like Nullsec is at the moment either struggling a little bit with getting more stuff out, or is basically needing more local resources, or putting more local resources into their production. I would say that with Siege Green, that's not abnormal. They're the ones that can make capital combat ships and actually use them and lose them. So it might just put a little bit of pressure on the potential outflow of Zydrine and Megasite, and that could be why we're seeing those higher prices. It's a little bit unfortunate then that it only has meant so far a stalling in the prices for the high-sec minerals. But yeah, they're not completely dependent on that. They might have their own miners to bring that in. And Megasite is doing the exact same thing. Goes up to 1250, so Megasite higher than Zydrine, back in my opinion, normal correlation when you compare the amount you can mine per cubic meters. 1276 for the sellers, 1134 for the buyers. Slightly more margin than with Zydrine, excuse me, but I do think that Megasite is basically having a little bit of a catch-up run here, where before we had a dynamic that there is other supplies that are keeping prices lower, that are keeping supplies higher, that are keeping the margin between sellers and buyers higher as well. But now I think on this upwards push for both Zydrine and Megasite, it's really Nullsec that is now able to once again dictate the price. Everything is coming together at those 1-year high points, and I think it could be here to stay because they're just able to use more of their own resources in Nullsec. Then finally we've got Morphite, nice and flat, well below 50,000 disc, 43 for the sellers, 42,000 for the buyers. Narrow margin of course as well, but pretty damn stable, tied to the Tech 2 economy, which I think is part of the reason why we've got these really low prices. Alright, then we're moving on to PI in a moment, but first I do have to blow my nose. There we go, apologies for that, but let's bring in PI, and that is coming in at 21.55. There we go, let's take a look at these. I think this is the chart that I was kind of expecting. The summer slump expectation starting to come in on the market as well, despite the higher potential activity in industry. With the Siege Green update, there is this other force that is probably bringing demand down and bringing prices down as well. So broadcast nodes are giving up on 1.5 million. Sellers are coming in now at below 1.5 a little bit, and buyers 135, and you can clearly see that demand is dropping off, and that's probably what's putting pressure on the price. At least for advanced PI materials, that seemed to be the story over the last couple of weeks. The less complex ones, like construction blocks with refined PI materials, were doing a little bit better. You can see here that over the last month we've actually been able to sell above 9,000 disc for construction blocks, but here at the tail end that does feel a little bit like a different story, a drop off towards 8,000 disc on a 5-day moving average. So we're talking 8,000 to 8,100 for the sellers, 6,000 for the buyers, and it's a complete demand drop off that is causing this pullback. Next up, we got coolants tied to fuels that is continuing to slightly recover from the nerf to water. That's part of the Siege Green update, so less water would be needed in the economy in general. And coolant is made out of waters, so that price dropped off quite massively on that announcement, but we are able to get back up there. 9,300 for the sellers, 9,100 for the buyers. It's not the 10,000 plus that we've been used to since late last year, but it is still, in my opinion, a very good price for a refined PI material that's super easy to make on gas planets. They're everywhere, so this is quite impressive. I do think that this demand to fuel-related PI materials does remain surprisingly high at the moment. I would say I'm going to probably step up my selling a little bit personally. Then we get enriched uranium, also tied to fuels, able to maintain a 10,000 disk pretty damn easily. 10,100 to 200 for the sellers, 9.3 for the buyers. Gotta be a little bit careful here. There is definitely a drop-off in demand as well to be spotted. And then integrity response drones is our one exception, or maybe I shouldn't say our one exception, but clearly our standout when it comes to the advanced PI materials that have gained a lot with the Siege Green update. They're up above 2.5 million and they are super expensive, 2.8 for the sellers, 2.5 million for the buyers. And you can see here, completely different dynamic. There's just not enough supply for the market. Eventually, don't expect this to last forever. Producers will notice that, and I think potentially it might be on a different planet, but if you have a setup that can make broadcast nodes, you can get a setup on that can make integrity response drones as well. So I think that supply imbalance is going to rectify itself relatively quickly. Then we get the mechanical parts, that's also giving up on 10,000 disk, but 10,000 for the sellers and 9.3 for the buyers. It's a drop off in demand that seems to be putting pressure on these average prices, but it's still a very respectable price in my opinion. Then miniature electronics for another refined one, still above 10,000 disk, very impressive, 10.5 for the sellers, 10,000 for the buyers as well, showing that there are some segments with strong demand still. Nano factories though, clearly at the low end of its average range at 780,000, 830 for most, so let's say 800,000 for the sellers, also 800,000 for the buyers, but you can't browse too much when it comes to the buyers. You can browse plenty for the sellers, so it's right on the edge and there's more supply than what's actually needed at the moment. Organic mortar applicators doing a little bit of a bounce, but clearly low end of the range as well, 670 to 620, pretty narrow margin for, again, way less demand than there is supply. Recursive computing module, same story again. I think for advanced PI, except for our integrity response drone winner, it is very difficult for most of these. Below 1 million for the sellers, below 900,000 now for the buyers as well, clearly low end of the range. Robotics able to get back above 70k, all right, not bad. 72,000 for the sellers, 69,000 for the buyers. Historically speaking, still not a great price. I remember robotics for 100,000 disk, but in the context of the full PI story of the last probably 4 or 5 years, this is actually a pretty damn good price for robotics, and we might just have to accept that while the refined PI materials like mechanical parts, coolants and things like that are making their way back towards the 10,000 average, which is an historical average. Where were we here? Robotics, the specialized ones might just become those that have lost 30%, and that this is their new normal price as well. Might just be when PI matures, there's more players able to bring in those robotics. There should still be a margin on that, and as a result, this is the new normal price. Then we've got our rocket fuels, well above 10,000 as well, 10,600, 10,700, so almost 11,000 for the sellers and almost 9,000 for the buyers. So again, we are seeing a little bit of margin that potentially opens up here between sellers and buyers. So a slightly lower demand seems to be the case. Self-harmonizing power cores, also a winner, not as pronounced as integrity response drones, but is now landing on 2 million ISK, 2.1 for the sellers, 2 million for the buyers exactly. Specialized for the smart fabs, dropping back off to 50,000 ISK, 57,000 to 46,000, and here you can see once the daily volumes are lower, the lower demand is having a much more immediate impact on the price. Again, same warning. I'm actually probably going to look at doing a little bit more selling right now because I don't expect summertime to be all that good in general. Then we've got sterile conduits, right? Same problem, going below 900,000 for the sellers, 823 for the buyers. Our supercomputers actually have a little bit of a counter bump. Specialized going for 80,000 disk, but an opportunity like that I think gets plugged pretty quickly. You can already see that the pressure is on. Sellers coming in here at below 80,000, buyers are at 72. This is a little bit of a supply problem that caused the price to spike, but I think it will be rectified pretty quickly by the market. Synthetic oil starting to see a little bit of pressure on this one as well. 9k for the sellers, 8k for the buyers. Again, demand dropping off a little bit compared to supply, and probably a little bit less daily volume, so 250,000. And then coolants is 1 million a day, exactly. As the volumes lower, the impact of the lower demand is a little bit more apparent or more quick. Synthetic synapses landing on 75k, sellers are coming in at 78, buyers at still one at 70,000. Let's see if there's more outside the JITA. That nope, and then it's 65,000, which in my opinion starts to look pretty interesting to build back up some synthetic synapse reserves in expectation of one of these, which is when CCP comes out and makes some faction implants and things like that available as a reward for an event or something like that. But with the one warning, of course, there is this potential massive change to implants and attributes that CCP has mentioned at FanFest, and so it feels a little bit more risky now to make a purchase, for instance, synthetic synapses, than it was before FanFest. So yeah, there is definitely still that potential CCP trade in there, but it's not going to be as reliable as it was over the last couple of years. Transcranial microcontroller, 75k, 76 to 70k, pretty stable at actually a decently high price. Volumes of this 100,000 a day for a special large I think is not bad at all, so a little bit more immune to the lower demand, but I think eventually it'll start to show through. Like with the water-cooled CPU, you can see volumes less than 20% from the one we saw previously. Refined PI material, and here the impact is quite apparent. 4.7 for the sellers, and where's the demand? Nowhere to be seen. And then we get the wetware mainframes that are doing alright, staying above 1.5 million, 1.6 almost for the sellers, 1.5 for the buyers. To get these average prices though, you get quite a bit of selling happening to the buyers as well. So pressure is on, I think, for PI. The story is that we're seeing those first few signs of lower demand, which I again am attributing to summertime coming in. Next up, advanced moon materials. That's coming in at 31.35. There we go. Oh, I think I bounced up against the microphone. Hope it doesn't come through too much. But yeah, let's get started with the carbides. And honestly, if I'm looking at, continuing the theory that summer slump is coming and that should not be good for prices, then this is really not good for Tech 2. But let's get started here with crystalline carbonite. Kind of what I expected. We went to under disk, we get a little bit of a bounce, not even on that much in volumes, right? So the market is like, under disk, I haven't seen that in probably forever for carbides. So let's bring that back up a little bit. But the reality is that these are massively oversupplied. Moon mining is very, very active, and there's a lot of resources available in moons now, and so supplies putting the pressure back on crystalline carbonites, back down to 112 for the sellers and 91 for the buyers. And this is what I was actually a little bit afraid of, or what I think you should be afraid of if you're looking for higher prices and higher Tech 2 prices, is demand will drop off here as well. And so there's nowhere near 100 disk on the buy side of crystalline carbonite at the moment. For Caldari, it's titanium carbide, same story, and actually a sharper drop off, which is also normal when back to 150 after going below 100 disk, but we are right back to 109 for the sellers, 103 for the buyers. Slightly better demand than what we saw before, but still I can't browse here, so we can get below 100 disk to 95 relatively quickly. Maybe 7 million units, and we're at 95 for the buyers as well. That's gonna put a lot of pressure on this, while sellers, there's plenty of them. Here's 1 million, here's 6 million, here's 20 million, here's 10 million. So the oversupply reality is here, and I don't think it's gonna end with the summer slump. On the contrary. Then we've got Minmetar, which is not metamaterials, but we're looking for Fernite carbide right here. Flat at 100 disk, so this one did not manage to recover from going below 100 disk to well above that. Here I think the investors were way more careful. They were like, I'm gonna buy stuff below 100. I'm not gonna risk going back to 120, 150 or anything like that. So sellers at 100, buyers are at 90. And yep, maybe you can see slightly better in the number of buyers, but the volumes on this are way more timid than the supplies yet again. And then for tungsten carbide for Amar, we're starting to see the crest as well, and data points close to 100, 109 to 100 for the buyers. And this is it, right? These are the buyers. 50k at 100, 100k at 100, then 100,000 units at 99, and then it's 91 ISK, and then we're right back with how are you going to defend 100 with this is the buyers. And this felt like an opportunistic buy 20 days ago, 30 days ago, but here it is. It's coming into play potentially very quickly, especially when above this it's 100 or a couple 10,000 ISK, and here we're still talking millions on every single sell order. So the pressure is back, kind of as expected. Let's see if this translates to the metamaterials. Then we've got for Galente first, photonic metamaterials. Yep, pressure here as well. Went back above 7.5 on some buying, but as I mentioned it, I believe last week or the week before that, you could be catching a falling knife in this market. 8,000 now below that for the sellers, below 7,000 for the buyers. And look at this pressure is quite substantial. So average price is back below 7.5. Then we've got Caldari, which is non-linear metamaterials. Can't buck the trend here either. Did a little bit better again, touched 10,000, went back to 15k. But this might just turn out to be the wrong move for those that bought this upswing. We are talking 12,760 now for the sellers, 12,460 for the buyers. So a little bit more competition in this one, but I think under the general pressure, this will eventually break down as well. Might be wrong on that. You know, I'll remind you guys, I don't have a crystal ball, but these are my personal expectations, but I think it's not going to stop. Then we've got Minmatar, which is for plasmonic metamaterials. Same story, went back up to 15k and is breaking down quite quickly, 13,000 to 1160. And then finally for Amar, it's terahertz that also went to 12.5, so a little bit more careful here on the buyers. And then we're already down to 11.6 and buyers are already below 10,000. So the general vibe is still pressure, and that in my opinion means that we cannot expect anything else in the other advanced moon materials. So here is our fermionic condensates, had the same little bump, probably, you know, investors buying at 40k, looking at this 1 year low point, maybe even decade low point for a lot of these advanced materials, which is on the doubling of availability. And as we've seen through the economy, at first it was morphite, right? An immediate jump on the double morphite deal that crashed that price down substantially, which was of course part of the plan. Then it moved on to stabilizing and bringing prices down for high-sec minerals as well. Low-sec is its unique little thing. Now null-sec is turning around, but the activity is moon mining, and that was basically the final one, and that's this massive decline here since March in the worth or the prices, because there's just so much more available. Yeah, it's part of the reality, and again, on a low summer activity, I don't expect that to be any good. And sellers, buyers, 43k for the sellers, no buyers at 33,000. So they definitely are, you know, going. We went below 40k, and then you started to buy. Well, we want to see prices closer to 35,000 or something like that. So yeah, be careful of those falling knives. Ferrogel starting the decline as well. I think unless we see something completely different on the chart, right here, look at that, it's exactly the same thing. Then we can assume that indeed that is the story. Early May, this was spotted, of course, as a very pronounced 1-year low point, and quite a few players came in to invest, but the pressure is on. I think phenolic composites is the first one here that didn't manage to make a bounce, and is starting to actually show signs that, yeah, we're going even lower. Pressurized oxidizers starting to show signs of pressure here as well. Same thing with reinforced carbon fiber, ceramic fibers holding on a little bit better on slightly higher volumes, but again, by next week we might see this drop off quite sharply as well. That's my expectation. Again, might be wrong on that, but I don't think we're in for a good time. And as a result, let's take a look at the Take-Two ships. I think here catching falling knives is another very strong possibility for those that are looking to buy a lot. But let's get started on those at 39.10, let's say. There we go, and let's get started as always with the Basilisk. That's actually doing a little bit of a counter move at the moment, but on next to no volumes, we're able to get an average price of probably 135 to 140 million. It's 136.5 for the sellers and 124 for the buyers. But you can see how anemic the market is. Daily trades 15 ships a day, and honestly, with these low prices, those that are still making Take-Two ships will probably bring them to the market. They'll still see a margin here. It's going to be more selling, and I think buying is going to potentially start to drop off as well. Unless, right, there's always, of course, those possibilities for different things, like maybe a Nosek war can happen. Maybe CCP can come out with some really cool stuff that drives players to play the game, to maybe lose ships, things like that. I don't know. But unless there is this outside interference on the current trend, I think, you know, we could see Basilisks towards 100 million or something like that. I think it's entirely possible. Cerberus is doing more of what I expected, really starting to drop off, and actually those minimum prices are now below 130 million at 1 year low points as the volumes drop off as well. So it's 138 million to 120 million and there are no buyers. That's kind of what I was fearing. And so that when you bought here and you bought here, yeah, too early. And I always mention, you know, make sure you don't put all your eggs into that one buy order, but buy slowly and keep an eye on the markets. Curse doing a little bit of a reverse one, managing to make its way back above 150, but look at those minimum prices, they're not budging from being below 150, so it's 167 to 143, probably. Well, actually supply is quite plentiful at the moment. Might actually be that they're already starting to jump in on that 170 potential, which is the high point here. So a little bit of buying that came in here, but the pressure is already starting to come back in. The damnation is flat below 300 million ISK. Minimum prices, yeah, we're starting, average price starting to come down here as well. 271 on, yeah, no demand, below 250 on that one. Again, we're gonna start to look a little bit more at the chart to see if there are exceptions to the trend. But here's the Deacon, that same early May buy opportunity, a little bit of a bump, but the pressure is right back. The Eagle, same story, a little bit of a later bump, but you can see that we're just not able to get back above 150 in any substantial way for the average prices. Then we get the EOS, is at the moment went down to another 1 year low point and is trying to get back up a little bit, but I don't think it'll do too much. Then the Ares, right, bumped up above 50, is already back below 50 million. Flycatcher flat at the low end. Guardian went below 130 million as well, a little bit like the Basilisk, went back up towards 150, but it's not able to do so. I think this is one of those patterns that I was mentioning as well, where our high points are continuously going down and down and down, and then eventually, right, the low points, yeah, probably a 120 or something like that for the Guardian. Where are the buyers? Let's take a look at that. Actually just below 130 to 136, but eventually I think that'll break down as well, and then we'll potentially be looking at even lower average prices. Heretic flat and pretty low. Hound, a little bit of a bump back to 20. Pressure is right back. We're talking 19 million now to 18 million for the buyers. The Ichthyorsa are our Triglavian Take-Two ships are really not tied to the others, but I think here they'll probably be suffering from the summer slump as well. So here we can start to see prices drop off a little bit. I would say if we ever see this like below 500 million for the buyers, that could be a time to look into potentially grabbing a cheap Ichthyorsa, which again, I think your horizon will have to become after the summer for a lot of this stuff. Then we get the Ishtar, yeah, flat below 150, not that much to say here either. Kirin went to 1 year low point, and very timid price increase again after that, which is already curtailing back down on volumes that are completely collapsing. So I'm actually expecting, yeah, no buyers right here. That's it for the buyers. And then sellers, it's not that big of a market, but there are clearly a lot more of them. And you can imagine that if someone is producing currents, their input costs are still going down as well, so they're able to just push in here as well, and potentially, yeah, even lower lows might be on the books. Manticore going back down below, well below 20 million as well. Sellers are there, but buyers, yeah, 17 million for a Manticore. I think a year ago no one would have ever believed that to be possible. Nemesis below 15 again, yeah, below 15 for the sellers, 13 million for the buyers. Not many buyers here. Nighthawk 1 year low point right now, 283 million, and yeah, 3 buy orders in JITA. I actually want to take a quick look. This is just for personal information at what this is actually about. 5 launchers. Does it have drones? Tech 2, so good resist. It actually has small drones. Honestly, for like an event ship or something like that, this can be pretty damn interesting, because of course Caldari shields are quite amazing. Missiles are pretty good here, probably quite bonused as well. Having, yeah, quite a few missiles. You can even put in a shield command to really give yourself that burst. This could be one of those ships that I might look into at the moment. Are there some really cheap Tech 2 ships that I want to buy? Because I want to use them myself. And this is a time to experiment. This is now a command ship, not exactly something that I would usually say I would try to buy to use in PvE, because it used to cost 500-600 million ISK. Might as well go with an Ishtar or something like that at that point. But now that this one, you're potentially buying this for, let's say, 270 million ISK, honestly is something that I can see myself do. So 1 year low point on really no demand, and yeah, just broke through the 300 million pretty easily for the average price. Olneros, a little bit of a bump from 100 million, but again, last couple of days you can see how quickly the pressure mounts again. Purifier, not yet willing to go below 15 million, so there are still some buyers coming in here, but for how long? Then we get to Rook, 1 year low point as well for a recon ship, 0 buyers, and look how those sellers are pushing that price down to 120 million, and it's a Rook, it's Caldari, so it has 5 launchers as well. This is just for me, and another small drone, so this actually could be another one of those that might want to look into for potentially an event type ship. Might even be like for smaller stuff, where you could get light missiles to be useful. Could be interesting. And that we've got all of these very cheap Tech 2 ships at the moment. Saber went below 40, pushed back towards 50, but there's the pressure yet again. Scalpel starting to go back. Are we below 15 million for the sellers? No, still just above that. But buyers are below 15 million, and yeah, they could, you could start to get some guys that come in, like here. I'm gonna try to buy 20 of them at 10 million, and then we're gonna start to see a little bit below that, play 11, 12. Eventually this will be broken down, and then yeah, you're set for another lower price range. Scimitar went to 100 million, bounced back a little bit, but again, for how long? Sleipnir still averaging at 261 to 242 for a Tech 2 command ship, and started the year at 500 million ISK. Kind of the same story. You could look into what you can do with some of these, and here now you get a Vagabond. That's actually, I think, for PvP very strong, going for 157 to 147. Actually, probably one of the better prizes still if you're looking for higher prizes. And then the Zarmast is starting to drop off as well. But again, for me, those Triglavians, I would look for 1 year low points before you jump in, especially with the summertime coming. So pretty interesting, but let's take a look at Tech 3 next, coming in at 48.20. and see what's happening here. So the theory has been that for destroyers, our gas supplies are a real problem. We saw last week that those prices are a lot higher as well, and so this is why we're basically able to maintain our disconnect between Confessor, Hecate's Jackdaw. Those that are more popular still manage to draw in a little bit of production, as you get some volatility, higher price, but sometimes at least some supply, and then this Vapel is really left by the wayside. But last week I think it felt like we might just be in such a drought for tactical destroyers that everything might be coming together at like a 55 million range. So the Confessor is still going for 60 million ISK, 51.3 for the buyers, and is seeing some supplies that are trying to take advantage of the 60 million price point. That will hopefully or probably bring prices back down a little bit. Then we've got the Hecate that is stepping up slightly, but yeah, average prices 55 for the sellers, 53 million for the buyers. Look, that's a way narrower margin than what we historically remember, and there are some supplies on this one as well. All right, not exactly sure where all that is coming from, but okay. And we get a Jackdaw that's going above 55 million as well, 56 million in fact for the sellers, 52 for the buyers. Yeah, supply here feels a little bit more normal to keep that price steady. So expect Confessor to still draw in more, and that one can easily come together with all three of these at around 55 million for the sellers, but all buyers I think are above 50 as well for these ships. So narrow margin, looking for that consensus price with, well, potentially indeed very difficult industry at the moment for these tactical destroyers, because of course of those incredible gas prices. And then the Zwepel, yeah, right, is trying to do that catch up, right? Look at that higher end of the margin, trying to get back to 55 million, and you can again see how the buyers are slowly edging up towards 50 million as well. So it's still lagging behind a little bit, 54 million to 49 million, but supply is 2s and 1s, so this is really not enough supply to keep this price steady, and as a result I think this Vapel might just have that catch up in it, just because it's just such a problem to bring in enough gas for the production of these tactical destroyers. But still, there is this disconnect between what the Confessor, Hecate and Jackdaw are doing. They've got more volatility, really high prices that then at least drive in a little bit of supply or creation. This Vapel is just your tiny market, and is still lagging behind on the price, but that margin is closing, and eventually I do think those sellers will start to move above 55 million as well. And at the moment we are in the age of very cheap Tech 2 ships but very expensive tactical destroyers. And then for the cruiser market, I think things were a little bit more volatile, potentially even trade-worthy. Here is the Legion with minimum prices starting to play on the 180 million mark as well. Look at that, sellers at 180, buyers at 175. If you're looking, you know, if you need to jump in, you're right, you want to get your ISK into something that can potentially make you, get a trade going. I think here a Legion 175, 176. We're on the downside, so it is absolutely, I think, possible to try and grab one well below 180. And you saw here spike close to 200, above 200, 190 is absolutely possible on this one. Then we get the Loki, is actually at a high point, so you should probably look into selling if you're holding any that you want to. 15 for the sellers, 186 still for the buyers. So we always maintain a pretty healthy margin between sellers and buyers, because you can look at those minimum prices right here. They're on the sellers, and so here for the Loki, this is a seller's market. This is a great price, and it's able to maintain that quite easily. We need to see a lot more supply and finally a pullback to really see that a pattern like this before we jump back in on the Loki. Proteus is starting to move down, but unfortunately really landing right in the middle of everything, with the minimum prices starting to come back up as well, 189 to 183. So the good news is there really isn't that much demand in general. If a desperate seller sells 3 more of them, we're below 180. If he sells 1 more of them, we're below 170. Then you'll start to see these minimum prices, I think, potentially go back down substantially, and we might create that buy opportunity. But If some more buyers come in, then of course we could stall right here, and then we're going nowhere for trading. But the Tengu, right, was clearly in a sell opportunity like 10 days ago, about 2 weeks ago. I think this was building up well above 200 million. Now sellers are coming in at 196, but buyers are already dropping off to 182 as well. And so on this downside right here, I think a buy order close to 180 is actually possible for the Tengu. On this full 1 year chart, it makes a lot of sense to try that, and selling at 200 or above 200 seems to be something that's absolutely possible. So maybe a little bit early, but Tengu and Legion might just be in the right spot for potentially a buying for a trade. That's not that long term, honestly, because I feel like these have been moving relatively volatilely quite a lot, and I think this might be tied to events announced or done by CCP. And I think throughout the summer, if there's one thing that we can actually expect for CCP to do to try and keep a little bit of activity in the game, it is regular events and maybe even a little bit of story stuff towards that that storytelling and that potential expansion like experience that they're planning to do. I think throughout the summer they might have some plans for that, and if there's one ship that seems to be the winner of all of this, it's the Proteus. For me personally, to actually fly them again, I'm gonna look into some really cool Take 2 ships to prepare for that, like a command ship, right? Cool battle cruiser, super tanky, very powerful, maybe a weird off-meta cruiser as well. They're so cheap now, why the hell wouldn't you buy and build a couple of those? And then for the extra product for the week, we're gonna take a look at faction frigates coming in at 55 minutes. Just interested in seeing how those are doing. It's been a while. And frigates, we're talking a faction, so not advanced, but faction frigates. Let's start with the pirate faction frigates. And what's the Astero doing? Going for 100 million ISK, really? 100 million for the sellers, 92 million for the buyers. Again, you're getting like a Take 2 cruiser for this, practically. So this is kind of a crazy price, of course, going down a little bit on the Siege Green update, but still super expensive. And I think we'll be able to go over these actually relatively quickly. A Crewer going for 87 million. The Daredevil above 100 million as well. High point was 130 million for a Daredevil. Dramiel 100 million as well. Yeah, 105 for the sales, and it's a complete lack of supply. So this is a very different dynamic. It's super difficult to make, super expensive to make, and so a faction frigate that doesn't even have a Take 2 tank is probably going for close to the price of a Take 2 cruiser at the moment. That's kind of crazy, with the Gormer at 105 million. A Succubus going for, ouch, 120 million. Yeah, that's Take 2 cruiser. And then finally the Worm will be pretty expensive. Actually doable, 93 million for the Worm right here. Navy faction's probably going to be a completely different range. Yeah, exactly. Caldari Navy Hook Bill selling for 14 million. Maybe slightly expensive at the moment. Federation Navy for Galente, very cheap, heading for 10 million at the moment. Imperial Navy Slicer for Amar, expensive, above 12.5. Republic Firetail below 10 million, quite cheap. So it looks like at the moment we're in a cheap phase for Minmatar and Galente, and expensive for Caldari and for Amar. Skybreaker is going, well, that's our different one, of course. 64 million for a Skybreaker. Probably a little bit much again compared to some Take 2 stuff. And then a Crucifier is going for 15 million. Yeah, again, quite expensive for Amar. Griffin for Caldari, not too expensive, but still 14 million. And then our Molus for Galente is going for 13.5. Alright, still a little bit of a mixed picture. And then Vigil Fleet Issue, actually very cheap. So if you're looking for an investment in some faction stuff, to me it looks like Minmatar is the thing to look into at the moment. But no, again, that I think this could become a little bit hotter with plans that CCP does have for updates to faction warfare. I think that could be very cool. It could have drastic impacts on how the loyalty points are earned and what you can do with them, etc, etc. So this could go in any direction really. It could make things even cheaper, it could make things more expensive, but it could also bring that dynamic back in a more sharp way. I would say that a winning faction has a lot of those points and thus has cheap stuff, and a losing faction has a lot doesn't have a lot of those points coming in, and so everything there becomes expensive. It used to be super pronounced and super profitable to keep an eye on that and to be trading this right with the, I think they put the emphasis back on PvP kills in order to learn those points, not the PvE activities, and so that correlation started to be a little bit less strong, and as a result it's been quite a bit more difficult to trade that way, but I think with the updates, with the right updates, that could be back completely. So we'll see how things evolve there as well, but we're definitely gonna stay in touch with those faction ships as well, especially those Navy faction ships. Both actually. I think for Pirate faction, CCP will have to do something eventually, and then for Navy faction, I think that could be very interesting with the faction updates that we know are in the works at the moment. So for the immediate future, nothing all too spectacular in my opinion to look forward to. A summer slump I think will dominate most of what we see on the markets, but longer term I actually do look forward to seeing what CCP has cooked up for EVE Online, and I think especially the faction warfare stuff could be very cool for the game. So that's it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and as always, I'll see you next time.